doesn't always know how to attract, let alone retain the right people, the right talent to help you get where you want to go. And you have a bunch of people that on the surface are not super sophisticated, and they don't necessarily respond to the same interventions or training or development or performance reviews, that their office-based counterparts do. So you have a very challenging job. But I will tell you one thing you have in common with every other leader, even in the C-level, something very important, which is you don't have all the answers. I don't care if you are the CEO of a $100 billion company, or you are the frontline supervisor or manager of one location. And I've talked to all of you. You all struggle with this sort of perception that you have to have all the answers. And spoiler alert.
Greg Sheldon here, your host of Metal, Steel, Manufacturing, and Business Pro podcast, where you learn everything about the metals and manufacturing industry that make your modern day life possible.
All right. Welcome to the show, everybody. We're back. And today we have the pleasure of Claire Chandler. She's the president and founder of Talent Boost. And she brings a unique perspective to the metals and manufacturing industry. She's got so much experience and has a lot of chief executive roles, well, C-suite roles, I would say. And she's an author in many publications, Forbes being one of them. Is that correct? Yes.
That's right.
And so there comes, I would imagine the barrier to entry on that is quite large. So everything you say has a lot of value and merit. So thank you very much for coming today.
Well, let's hope so. Let's hope it's got a lot of merit. Thanks, Greg. I appreciate the intro and the injection of faith into this conversation.
Absolutely. You're welcome. So tell us a bit about yourself. I mean, I looked at your profile, and that's always good, but it's always nice to hear the story. How did you get to doing what you're doing and caring about people, and how does all that start?
Yeah, I love that. So I spent the first couple of decades of my career within corporate America. After, by the way, swearing I was never going to work for a big corporate company. I'm not, I'm a product of a school teacher and a small business owner, and going the corporate route was just not something that drew me, but that's where the opportunities were coming out of college. And in 2011, I was vice president of human resources for a large global organization, traveling all the time, learning a lot, leading a great team, working with some amazing people. But I got a health scare. I got a cancer diagnosis that kind of knocked me out of the, out of commission for a while, dealing with that. I'm cancer free now.
Good.
But the
goodness.
gift that, well, thank you. Yeah. The gift that gave me was that it forced me to stop running away from that voice in my head that had been trying to ask me for a while, are you doing what you're passionate about? And I had to finally admit, when I was off work, I had stopped running, I had stopped traveling to deal with my health. I had to finally acknowledge the answer was no. Loved the company, loved the people, had liked the work, but it really wasn't where my heart was. And so I got healthy, I got well, I came back, gave notice, and then really just kind of took the leap back in 2011 onto my own entrepreneurial journey. And it's funny because I work with a lot of big companies now, but I also work with a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of startup companies. And when you talk to entrepreneurs, most of them have a story like that. Not everybody went through cancer, but most entrepreneurs that I have spoken to, and most founders, have some sort of transformational experience, right? Some sort of catalyst that knocked them out of their complacency and got them onto the path of the journey that they're on now. So what that looks like now is took me a couple of years of really just sort of figuring out what I wanted to do with my entrepreneurial journey, because there were a lot of things I could do. There were a lot of things I liked to do. There were a lot of things I knew how to do, but how could I bring into alignment the sweet spot between what I really enjoyed and people that I would enjoy spending time with in helping them solve some things, right? So I formed my company Talent Boost in 2013, and I specialize in helping align, really at the executive leadership level, helping align their teams, their leaders, their culture, and their strategy so that they can accelerate their growth journey.
Wow, that's awesome. And what a challenge that would be, I would think.
Big challenge, especially now. Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's obviously something that is in the culture today, is finding and keeping people. Um, and I'm curious, in all your experience, has that evolved over time to what people want, or has it stayed the same? And, how can um, organizations or management teams really tune into what the people want? Because both need each other. Some don't realize that, but they both need each other. I would say when you're looking up, you're thinking, oh, they don't know anything, I know everything. And sometimes it's the other way around, but they both need each other. It's a symbiotic relationship. What are the things that people are looking for in an organization?
I'm sitting here smirking because it's so true, right? When you talk to the folks on the front line, and I have several clients that are in the manufacturing, the mining and metals industry, which is part of you and I connected. And when you talk to the guys and gals on the front line, that's one of their chief complaints. My supervisor, the manager above him or her, and the executive wing have no idea of what it is that I do. They don't know my job. And I'm smirking because not only is that true, but it's equally true that those in the executive wing say, the people on the front lines don't appreciate, what is weighing on me and what I am tasked with accomplishing. And just because I have a bigger salary doesn't mean it's all easy and cushy.
No.
Right. I mean, it's the higher up you go, the bigger the problems, right? The bigger the bigger the risk if you screw up. And so I think, to your question, I think one of the things that everybody is looking for is a better connection, right? In every direction, a better connection between each other, a better connection certainly between the leaders and those who are trying to follow their lead. And I think really, especially more recently, they are looking for a connection between what they do and why it matters. Yes, why it matters more globally. Yes, why it matters to the organization, but also on a personal level, why it matters to them. And I think that quest is just as keen for the people on the front lines as it is for the people in the C-suite. I think they're all looking for meaning. They're looking for meaning in their work. They're looking for a connection. Because I think everybody kind of has gotten to the realization that I got to with my cancer story, but through a global pandemic, that life is too short.
100%.
Right? So I think that kind of woke people up. And I think that is really what we have in common, and we can build from that.
Yeah, absolutely. Wise words. I think, because I've been on both sides too. It's clearly not where you've been, but in a company where I started on the floor and worked my way up into management. And it's almost like the transparency part is missing. And it's not because of a lack of trying. It's by you can only perceive through your own eyes. So you can't know all the things that a person's doing in a management role, right? I mean, there's a lot there, and then vice versa. So I'm not sure if there's a solution to that. I'm just thinking out loud.
I think the good news is there is a solution to that, right?
Okay.
Because I think you're 100% right. I think we all look at the world through the lens of our own experience.
Yeah.
And that has formed us. It has informed us. It has biased us, good or bad, right? But I think we all look through that lens. A lot of my work, especially now that we are back in person with groups, is around strengthening those connections, those dynamics across teams. Because people walking into a room are coming in from very different perspectives. They all think they're right.
Everybody
They all think
does.
they have the best intention, and other people don't. right? They have this sort of, well, I know where my heart is and I know what I'm, truly intending, but I doubt that they're on the same page. And because we walk in with those assumptions, or we at least at the very least assume that somebody else is going to look at things differently from us. And if it's different, therefore they're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And in this day and age, it's kind of where we are, unfortunately. We have to fix that, right? So a lot of the companies that I do work with initially call me to come in and help them build out their strategic plan. Because now that we're through the thick of COVID, we've sort of dusted off right before COVID. It was so interesting because right before the pandemic hit, I was working with clients on like a 10-year plan, right? Some of them were like a 20-year plan. And looking back now, like how ridiculous and how arrogant was it of all of us to think, we had a 20-year vision that we were going to stay, true to, right? So then, some of them were 10-year. Well, now that we're through the pandemic, what that taught us was that was completely unrealistic. There's so much beyond our control, and there's so many ways that the market evolves and people change in terms of what they're looking for, to your earlier question, that the most realistic thing that we can do, the most actionable, is a 5-year plan, right? And so they'll call me and they'll say, Claire, can you come in and help facilitate, do a workshop, whatever, and build a strategic plan? And my answer is always the same. Absolutely happy to do that as day 2. Day 1 has to be about getting people in the same room, around the same table, and on the same page from a human perspective first, right? So taking those very divergent lenses of experience and perspective, and maybe not changing how they see the world, but getting them to lean into having a much more transparent discussion and vulnerable discussion around why that's different for me than it is for you, and why both of those views can be right, can be okay. And so I think a lot of companies sort of skip over that, right? Because there's this urgency. Okay, we got through the thick of COVID. It's back to business. Everybody back to work. Everybody, like charge forward. And there is this sense of urgency. You can embrace urgency without being hasty about it. And I think if you take that one step, not even back, but take that one step to say, let's deepen the connection between us first, so we understand where each of us is coming from. And then on day 2, when we sit down and map out how we're going to get to that 5-year plan, we're doing it from a place of collaboration, not of conflict.
Yeah, I think that is, collaboration is so important. And then that creates the authorship too. And people understand from that they're being listened to, because there's that saying, and I think I've said it on this podcast before, is nobody cares until they know you care about them. Right. And that's true. But I want to back up a little bit. I'm curious about the motivation. So they call you, and I'm curious what it is they're after. Is it like an organizational problem? Like, I mean, not the organization, I mean, in like getting things done in a day, or is it bigger vision than that, or is it profit? And there's nothing wrong with any of these. I'm saying, I'm just curious, what is the motivation?
Yeah, well, and it's always a multi-layered question, right? Because they come to me with what they think is going on and what they think the priority needs to be. And then as you peel back the layers, you kind of understand what is underlying the ask, right? And so typically they will ask that from the standpoint of, we already know where we need to be 5 years from now. So it's not as much about identifying what those 5-year outcomes are. It's about now building out the roadmap to get there. Because just sort of painting the horizon is the easy part, quite honestly. The much harder part is to say, okay, well, how do we get there? Because you can't get there overnight. And so, they will come to me with this sort of, we've identified the outcomes, but we realize that we don't have the first clue how to get everybody to work together, because we've got silos and we've got conflict and we've got turf wars and we've got, all this sort of thing. And as you continue to ask them, and as I continue to ask them, why now? Well, COVID's over. Yeah, but why now? Like, you could have gotten these guys together a year ago. What else is prompting this? And as you talk deeper and deeper and you start to plan out what they say they need, what you really uncover is they have to solve their trust problem. they have a group of leaders at the highest level who don't trust each other.
Mm.
For varying reasons. And again, they all think that they're coming to the table with the right intention, with, you know, the good of the company, the good of their people, et cetera. Well, then in theory, so is everyone else. So why are you assuming that that's not the case? And so that is typically what is going on there. They are saying, you know, we've tried this out on our own. We realize we need some help. We know where we want to land, but we finally acknowledged we don't have the right pieces in place to get us there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and isn't it typical that you have to have an outside, you know, sort of impartial arbitrator almost to come in and help, you know, knock some metaphorical sense into them so that they can work together more effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all a mindset thing, I've found.
Totally.
It's all about explaining it in a way that makes sense to them, and you never get to that right away. But it is mindset. Yeah. I always wonder, that's always a thing for me. I'm always wondering, what is it that gets somebody to the point of making change? Because if you look historically of people, even as big as civilizations, we wait until a catastrophic failure to change. And it seems to be evident in business too. And it's great that your clients don't wait that long. And I'm wondering what the reason is. I mean, I guess they have the foresight. They're working, these organizations, I assume, are probably large enough that they're working more on the business than in the business.
Yeah.
Is that correct? I mean, some of the smaller clients, that's the hard part, right? Is they're so busy with all the stuff in a day that they aren't looking at the bigger picture. So,
well, you know, it's interesting because I agree with you. I think the smaller the companies, the harder it is to sort of segment out who and when and how we're going to do the strategic work on the business versus in the business. But I do find that even the large organizations find it hard to set aside that time to be strategic. I talk to leaders every single day, and it doesn't matter the size of the organization. It can be a mom and pop shop. It can be a one location manufacturing operation. It can be a startup. It can be a large global organization. And they all kind of say the same thing. They're like, you know, when we talk about where they're trying to get to, where they are now, and the biggest obstacle between the two, one of the things that always comes up is time. Every single time. It doesn't matter the size of the organization. There aren't enough hours in the day. We don't have enough capacity. You know, the larger organizations, the executives are always like, you should see my calendar. My calendar is so chock full of meetings and, you know, reports. And, you know, if I'm not talking to the CEO, I'm walking around and checking in with my leaders because they need some check-in too. And they've lost complete control of time. Right. And so when they do say, you know, things are starting to, typically they'll call me before things have gone off the rails, but they're starting to like make noises they shouldn't be making.
Okay.
Right. So they'll call me and say, we've got to do things a little bit differently. Great. Okay. We're going to lock you all into a room for like 2 days. Well, that's too much. That's never the right time. You know, we've got, pick your season. Any time of the year, it's the worst possible time to do it. Just like it's the worst time to go on vacation. It's the worst time to have a kid. It's the worst time to start, you know, XYZ, pick your poison.
Yeah.
And that's always the biggest hurdle is time. Yeah. But you very well know, and so do they, these are smart people.
Yeah.
That if you invest the time now and you take the day, the 2 days, the whatever it is to do that sort of forward thinking work and get people to collaborate, it's going to pay off in dividends, because the longer you wait for the right time to have those conversations, the farther off the rails your actual plan is going to go.
Yeah. I like that analogy, because you're never ready for certain things, like having kids. You think you're ready, but you're not.
Yeah. Well, you know, and the other piece too is, and I have this conversation with executive leaders all the time. It's like, they're waiting for more data, right? They're waiting for more information. And I say to them all the time, I'm like, I want you to think really hard about this question. When is the last time you had 100% of the information you needed to make an informed decision? Yeah, and they all just kind of sit back, just like you just did. It's like, yeah, like that.
That never happens.
It never happens. And so the higher up you go, the more business critical it is for you to figure out a way to make a decision faster with a
Yeah.
higher degree of clarity and confidence,
Yes.
but also build a culture where you can course correct along the way, because you're not always going to get it right. So how do you do it in a way that keeps moving forward, where you fail forward, and then where you learn from those blunders?
Yeah, absolutely. The learning is the key part because there's always mistakes, and that's where the value is, in my opinion. So I had a question that I forgot it. That happens to me every episode.
I'm so glad that's not just me.
No, it's definitely me. It happens a lot more. I just happen to be recording sometimes. Um, oh yes, adoption of so I'm curious that because we've gone through such a crazy worldwide thing, and now we're seeing so much, like we got chat GPTs in our face, we got all the crazy stuff.
Yeah.
Technology is here, it's in your face, you can't escape it. Are people in business leveraging those tools, or are they still kind of like, I don't know if I need that?
It's a little bit of both.
Yeah.
And again, the bigger organizations are still having we've got to move from just data to analytics conversation, let alone chat GPT and AI and automation and all of that stuff. So I think the first hurdle was just acknowledging it's not going away, right? Because
Okay,
that was
good.
sort of the first resistance of, well, that's too scary, that's too automated, it's taking over. It's like, I was just having this conversation earlier today. It's like chat GPT and that sort of technology didn't just bubble up out of the earth. Like we
No.
got to this point. We have been feeding data out into the universe for decades, if not centuries. And it's just, that's a technology that has been listening. Is now going to turn that into something. I know people, I know executive leaders where ChatGPT scares the crap out of them. Because what is that going to mean? What's the implication? How are we going to, and the impulse with some leaders is, how are we going to govern that? How are we going to control that? And I think that's a reflex that we have to stop.
Right.
We have to train ourselves as leaders to stop reverting toward that command and control impulse, to try to harness technology and try to suppress it or control it. The best companies, the best cultures, the best teams are the ones in an environment and in a culture where they are empowered because they have a common vision, they buy into it, and they know how to work together to go and figure out the best way to do it. That's how you innovate.
Yeah.
I was talking to an HR executive just a couple of weeks ago, and he was like, yeah, I was brought in, I'm new into this company, but because of my background, I was brought in to help innovate the way we're doing certain things. And the chief operating officer, when I first met with him, said, I'm fully supportive of you being innovative, as long as you're not disruptive. Well, you tell me how you do that.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And if that's not indicative of your question around, chat GPT and our people embracing it, I think the ones that are still putting up artificial roadblocks and trying to be in denial that it's here, it is here. Your people are using it. So you'd better figure out how to leverage it.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Okay. So where the cultural change, though, I mean, that is so key. And what is it? I mean, because getting to the why is so important. And these are all ChatGPT's just tools, right?
Yep.
But really the fundamental stuff is the people stuff, the people that only people can do, which is finding the why. Is there any kind of way that somebody that's listening to this can think, okay, I need to find a why. I get and I understand strategically and tactically why I need to do that. But what if I don't have a why, or I can't think of it? Like, is it a soul searching endeavor where it's like, what do I really care about? Because that's what it's been for me. And I'm just wondering how we can relay that message to somebody if they're wondering why are we doing this thing, like building this widget every day,
Yeah. I love that question. And part of the answer is yes, it's soul searching, but I think it's more effective when it's guided. And what I mean by that is I think, especially in the manufacturing industry, and these are my people. I love the
Yeah,
blue collar industries, right? They are the most real people on the planet. They're going to tell you
absolutely.
like it is. They're not going to hide behind corporate jargon. They're going to tell you what they need, what they lack, and how to get out of their way. It's a
Hmm.
beautiful thing. But they're not necessarily encouraged or empowered or even shown how to do some of that soul searching, right? So I think part of that comes through, and I hate to keep using the phrase creating an environment, but it's really what it is, building a culture and nurturing a culture where people can ask questions like that out loud, where they're not only not afraid to ask their leaders to help them make that connection to their why,
Hmm.
but they're actually encouraged to do it. They're empowered to do it. They're incentivized to do it. I think, that it's the cultures that shut that down, right? That say, don't ask questions, just, take that next hill. Well, you're not all in the military, right? I'm very pro-military. I'm married to a Marine Corps veteran. Like we're bonded around the importance of mission.
Yeah.
But people, like we talked about at the top of this conversation, people are looking for connection. They're looking for a deeper meaning. They're looking for a reason to come to work every day. And it's no longer for the paycheck. Doesn't
Hmm.
mean they're going to work for free, but it
No.
means that that's just the minimum price for entry. They want their work to matter, even if it's only moving the widgets along their piece of the conveyor belt. They
But
want to know that it's building towards something that has a deeper meaning for them, maybe
yeah,
for their family, and certainly for their future.
yeah, absolutely. And I would encourage, because I've been through this myself, where you'll ask questions because you want to understand, because you care, but sometimes the management or ownership will say you ask too many questions. What such a discouraging way of going about business. So, and I just wanted to throw that in there, that can be a discouraging thing, and that starts to compound, right? You start having resentment. And so answering questions and being open to communicating with people, because I mean, we all have things to do. We all have emails to answer. We all have stuff. But I think that is the critical part of business, is the communication with people. Take the time with the people. That's the main thing. The rest of the stuff can be done at other times and automated, but it's the people. Answer their
Yeah.
questions, care about them.
And here's where we bump up again against that artificial barrier of time, right? Because the leaders in your audience hearing that are going to say, yeah, I know that's what I should be doing, but there just aren't enough hours in the day to go around and have these conversations and ask questions of my people and have the patience to listen to their incessant questions. And it's like, you're doing it wrong, right? It's the same concept as it's never the right time to take a day or two or even a half day to work on your strategic plan or your team dynamics. It's like, if
Mhm.
you don't invest that time, you're wasting more time, just watching stuff go off the rails.
Yeah.
I was having this conversation with a leader last week, and he was like, he goes, I'm really frustrated with this one supervisor on my team. He goes, I had this really in-depth conversation with him, and I walked him through at length what I needed him to do and why we needed to do it that way. Because I've been working with him on focusing on the why.
Yeah.
And he was close, but he was missing a key piece. And I go, all right, so what happened? He goes, I was very detailed. He still didn't do it the right way. So now I'm going to meet with him again on Monday and sit down and I think he even used the word rehash. I'm going to go back through in excruciating detail all the steps and again explain to him the why. I said, okay, may I make a suggestion? He goes, okay. I said, did it click? And he said, well, what do you mean? I said, so we had this conversation around listening for the click, because so many leaders get stuck in this same kind of vacuum where they say, I don't know how many different ways I have to explain to my team what they need to do and why they need to do it that way. And it's
Mhm.
like, if you're the one doing all the talking and you're not checking, not just for understanding, because there's two layers to this, right? They have to understand what it is you're asking them to do. And then they have to buy into why it matters to them. Because again, they're looking for that deeper connection. So I said, I absolutely sit down with him again on Monday, but I want you to blow up your whole plan for how you were just going to rehash every single step. because that's when you become a micromanager, and nobody wants that.
Nobody wants that.
Right. So listen for the click, go back in there and have him reflect back to you what you talked about.
Yeah.
And search for the gaps, but strive for the click, not strive for the, okay, he can now parrot back to you all the steps. Because now, even if he follows them, he's not going to do them because he feels some sort of conviction toward it. He's only going to do it to get you off his back. And that doesn't deepen engagement. It deepens resentment.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. Man, I love it. So what was did he end up coming away with a result on that, or?
Well, so I haven't spoken to him yet, because that was he was going to sit down with him yesterday. So I'm talking to him in a couple of days. So I'll let you know how it went.
I'm curious.
But, you know, that's not an isolated thing. Like I
No,
talk
of
to
course not.
that all the time, right? Because I think everybody does it. Everybody says, okay, I told him what to do. You know, I did what you told me. I told him why it matters. Great. Okay, check the box. But he still didn't do it the right way. Okay, so you got to go back. It's a multi-layer thing. And we're asking people to buy into where we're trying to go at a deeper level that makes sense, you know, for these really ambitious growth outcomes and everything. But we also have to do the groundwork of making that connection deeper for those individual people.
Yeah.
And that's hard. And it takes more time. But if you invest that up front, it's going to pay dividends over the longer term, which is what we're striving for.
Yeah, for sure. So in your experience in all the companies you've been in and seen, and do you think that is the common denominator? Is the ones that are really successful, it's about the people. It's about, you know, nurturing those relationships and building those people up. And, you know, is that what it is? And then there's a greater mission to that. Their day-to-day correlates with their mission. Is that what it is?
I have seen, so short answer is yes. I have seen the more successful, longer lasting, better performing, more innovative companies are the ones that do invest the time and the effort and the conversations to, first of all, to get really, really clear on what that why is organizationally, right? Because you can't just turn on a light and, you know, in individual people around their own why, and then just go scattershot and hope that you succeed as a company, right? So they've got to sort of be channeled or harnessed toward that greater good or that bigger purpose. And I mean, companies for decades have been, you know, sort of working on their mission, but they're kind of confusing their mission and their purpose with their mission statement, right? I don't care what your mission statement says on your website. That's for everybody else. Like, but what do you deeply believe at your core is the reason your business exists? And you have to get very good as a leader, not only in understanding what that overall purpose is, but how to communicate that in a way where you don't have to convince anybody, but you can stand in your own conviction that this is something I believe in, and this is why I think you should believe in it too.
Yeah.
You have to do that first. And then you can start to make those linkages for every individual on your team in their own way, between what they do, the role that you've brought them on to accomplish, the objectives you're asking them to, you know, to achieve, the behaviors you want them to demonstrate, you know, all of those things, and how, when they are collaborative and they come together toward that bigger purpose, everybody wins. So it does sound like a lot of work, but when you do it in the right order and you do it for the right reasons, those conversations become easier.
Well, and I would add to that everything's a lot of work. I mean, you
Right?
might as well be doing the right things instead of the wrong things. So yeah, very good. So how does the hiring? I mean, I know the hiring process is critical, and I work with a woman that I respect huge, Rhonda Robinson. Shout out to her. She uses the predictive index, and which is so key to hiring and filling the holes that you need in an organization. Do you think that that's a good system? And I'm curious, you know, what are people doing? What are people comfortable with doing other than just putting an ad out that's your run-of-the-mill ad? Like, what is it around that that's important to do?
Yeah, so a couple of things on that, and I'll kind of touch on the predictive index, but first I'll talk about the ads. I think, you know, it's interesting. I see a lot of companies really, really paying more attention now to how they're describing the company that they're hiring people into, right? It used to be, it was sort of, especially for high volume hiring, you're just cranking out the job description, you're putting out postings, you're just hoping to widen the candidate funnel at the top, and then ultimately through a little churn and burn, get to the right combination of people. I've seen some really more future leaning organizations really take advantage of that job posting as the first sort of branding promise.
Beautiful.
Right.
Yeah.
For organizations, and not like how it's formatted, but just how it's
No, I know what you mean.
It's worded, right? The
Yeah.
tone of that. And it all has to be in alignment, right? You can't just go and hire some branding expert to write these really beautiful statements, but then not live up to the promise, right?
Yeah.
Because then you're bringing people in under false pretenses.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. I think if people spend a little bit more time, sort of building up their employer brand, yes, their brand in the market and, and their mission statement and all that, but just their employer brand in alignment, being really authentic to, this is not just our brand promise. This truly is the culture you're going to get. These are the types of things. Yeah. In manufacturing industry, my clients in blue collar, it's like, you know what, you get to play with big old life-size Tonka trucks, and you get to get dirty. And if you don't like dirt under your fingernails, you're probably not going to like working with us. Right. You have to be upfront, but you're going to attract the right
people. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's one. I'm very familiar with Predictive Index. It's a great tool. I happen to use a suite of assessment tools that are similar to that.
Okay.
That I use for candidate, I'm going to say assessment, but it's really not, it's not the sole determinant of who you bring in, but it gives you a really good bit of data, right, around what makes a candidate tick, what their fast lanes are, right? So sort of what comes naturally to them. And I think equally important in the tools that I happen to use, it also quantifies what motivates an individual. And that becomes really important, right? The other pieces of that tool help you identify candidate fit, right? So yes, culturally for the job that you want them to do, at least initially, but this other piece around what motivates them really helps you to take them from a candidate to a fully engaged, highly functioning employee. Because then you're not just saying, well, I only want people who are motivated by X, because then we can treat everybody the same. You're missing, right? I want to deeply understand what motivates you as an individual, so that when I am really clear with you about what I want you to achieve, I can help you do that in ways that fit into your fast lane, first of all, because then you're going to be more productive, but also in ways that motivate you, because then you're going to feel more fulfilled. And we know all the studies around fulfillment and engagement, and when people are more productive and they feel good about the work that they put in, they're going to go above and beyond. There is no organization that innovates when their employees are disengaged. It just doesn't happen. The only thing they're going to innovate is better ways not to get their work done without getting fired, and how to leave through the side door faster so you don't notice that they've gone.
Yeah. Yeah. There you go. There's some good indicators for you, listeners. Those things are happening. You may have a problem.
Yeah.
Okay. Very good. Well, and I think that makes, I never thought of this until, doing this podcast, that, the hiring is so key. It's so important to align those people with your organization values and what you expect of the people. And that's something I've run into as well. And I'm curious your thoughts on it. Do you want to hire a whole bunch of people that are like entrepreneur types, that are creative, that always want to, reinvent everything? Or is it better to have people that, are a mix of taking orders in that? Or is it just like, I want order takers? Because it can be a risky thing if you've got too many creative thinkers, I think. Because I'm one of those, and it's
right.
like I have a hard time working for people because I always like, I need to take this, I can take this thing to the moon, right? And it's not their vision. And those are some mistakes I've made along the way, is not communicating what my vision is along with theirs. But I'm just curious what you think about.
Yeah, it's such an important question to ask of leaders in a company, especially at the highest levels, because the answer is going to be different depending on your culture and what you truly need. If all you really want is a bunch of order takers, then advertise for that.
Mhm.
And be careful, because that's what you're going to get, right?
Mhm.
You're not going to get innovators. You're not going to get disruptors. I started to smirk when you went there, because it's one of my soapbox moments, because so many companies, just as a matter of course, advertise for candidates with entrepreneurial spirit.
Mm.
And that's wonderful if that's really what you are looking to cultivate.
Mhm.
But more often than not, organizations, especially big ones, advertise for people with entrepreneurial spirit. And then the minute they do something that does not conform with the corporate style or the management, guidelines or whatever,
Mhm.
they go, oh no, yeah, but we didn't mean like that. We didn't mean that you should do that, right? And so you have to be really careful. Like, if you're advertising for entrepreneurial spirit, this comes back to, how do you use the job posting in a way that is authentic and in alignment with the culture that you're trying to build and nurture?
Yeah.
Don't advertise that you want people with entrepreneurial spirit if you intend to suppress them and put them into a tightly lidded box. Your best people are going to leave, your worst people are going to stay, and you're going to wonder why your culture is so toxic.
Yeah. Yeah. So get your goals together, what you want.
Get them together, man.
Jeez. Okay, so let's segue into, actually, I got a quick question before we get into a new generation. Curious of ownership, like, because there's VC, venture capital owned, private equity owned, family owned, corporately owned. Do you see much of a variation there in those? And if you do, I'm curious the differences.
So it's interesting. I had a conversation. You're going to think I had 16 conversations
You had a
today.
lot of conversations.
I did. I do.
That's what you do.
Well, yeah. And it's great, because you kind of, one of the reasons that my clients rely on me is because I'm not the only person, they're not the only person I'm talking to. And so the more conversations I have, the more insights I can bring, and the more reassurance I can give executives that, all the things that are nagging at you that you don't feel comfortable sharing with anyone else but me, there are other people in other industries and other companies in your role that are feeling the same thing that you are. So you're not as lonely as you think you are, right?
Yeah.
But it's interesting. So I had this conversation either this morning or yesterday, around that very topic, right? How do, like, VCs and private equity, kind of coming into an acquisition, how does that differ from maybe a mature established organization? There are some differences. So, post acquisition, although I would have to say this is true of a large organization that is growing through merger and acquisition too. One of the big challenges that they will find is they walk in with this very clear growth strategy, right? Especially the investors. They wouldn't have bought that company or invested heavily in that company if they didn't see the upside potential. But the biggest thing that they always trip over is they walk in, and on day 1 or 2, they say, we've got this brilliant growth strategy. They're going to be tripping over themselves to accomplish that, because that's the reason, we were brought in. And they come in like this white knight, right? And the problem is a couple of things, especially, so I'll kind of drill in on the investment side. The problem is, prior to closing the acquisition, typically they've only had access to the owner and founder, or some very small group at the upper echelon of leadership. And so on day 1, when they have now taken over the reins, the rest of the leaders don't know them. They don't trust them. And they think that they're just there to, clean house, put in their own people, do things their own way. And when you talk to the investors, some of them, that's absolutely what they're going to do. But the ones that aren't, do not do themselves any favors, because instead of sitting down with those leaders and listening and asking questions, all the things that you just called out a moment ago, the very first thing they do is change something like the payroll system. And listen, you can't scale if everyone is on their own, one-off little.
Yeah, we get it. Yeah.
Right. That's how we scale.
Yeah.
But it's so deeply I can't even tell you how many investors I've talked to where they're like, we changed their payroll like week 1, and they started crying. And I'm like, well, of course they did, because you did none of the groundwork first.
Yeah.
You had no conversation with them about the bigger why of, this is why we thought you were so worth the investment. And this is where we see us going together. And part of the way we do that is we're going to have to get systems consistent. So one of the things we're going to change in the coming week is payroll, because we want to make sure we continue to like say that, but they don't say that.
Right.
They change the payroll system first. And so it just taps into and kind of presses the bruise on this innate human reflex we have to resist change.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so even mature organizations get that wrong.
Yeah.
They say, and it kind of goes back to the folks that call me and say, we've got these 5-year outcomes. They're super ambitious. So we need to hit the ground running. We need you to come in like next week and facilitate a strategic workshop. It's like, yeah, it's great. We got to do that on day 2, because day 1, like they don't trust each other yet.
Yeah. You got to
build. I don't care how talented their workforce is or how much you're paying everybody. If they don't trust each other, you're not going to get to that 5-year milestone. There's no way.
That's right. 100% agree. The first minimum 6 months should be, well, other things, but getting to know people, getting to know how it works, walking the floor, talking to people, building relationships. You could shorten that up. Could be 3 months, but yeah.
If you do it right, yes. If you're consistent, if you're authentic, if you're truly bought in, and it's not a check the box exercise.
That's right.
Where, well, I'm just going to walk around and talk to people because that's what I heard on a podcast we're supposed to do, right? Like you got to legitimately do it, and you got to understand why it's important.
That's right. Yeah.
You got to, like we were saying, like you got to listen for the click, right? You got to have conversations where people click with where you're trying to get to, and they start to lean in a little bit more, because otherwise they're just going to dig their heels in.
Absolutely. That's just human nature. There's no escaping it. So, but we do have a lot in common. We're all people and we all want to win. So let's make it all a group effort. I agree. Okay, cool. Well, thank you for that. That was very valuable. Now we're talking about a whole generation that's retiring, if not already retired, and, manufacturing and metals and all this stuff that's dirty and maybe people don't like it is actually really cool, in case anybody didn't know. But the question is on the street, like, how do we attract, younger people to this industry? How do we make it appealing as a destination, not as a place you end up? I'm curious what your thoughts are on that, Claire.
So what I didn't mention about my kind of journey to how I got here is I spent the majority of my years in corporate America were spent in the utility industry. And so very similar to manufacturing in that it is heavily reliant on the blue collar workforce, right? Which is why I say they're my people, right? So even though I mostly had corporate roles, we always understood we're not going to get to where we're trying to get to as a company without the right people in the right roles, kind of working collaboratively with each other and also with management, right?
Yep.
But we always had the same problem. How do you attract talent into an industry that feels very stodgy? It feels very boring. It feels very safe. And the up and coming generations don't want that. Or maybe just don't understand that they could want that, right?
I think that's accurate. Yes.
Yeah. And so there are a couple of things. And I think, again, one of the big things is to be very clear and very aligned and very authentic about what you're promising, right? It's not all about the wage, although you've got to be severely competitive with market. But it's also around, having a cadre of leaders, especially frontline leaders, who these younger folks coming in can learn from, can respect. Not that they're going to be buddies, but that they can feel like, if I'm gonna come in and do this sort of work, a lot of which is heavily manual, a lot of which can be quite dirty, a lot of which can be sort of backbreaking over time. I want to feel like I'm doing that for a company that I can believe in, certainly, but for leaders that I can respect, right? And I think that's important. So frontline leaders, especially, they need to get some training and some coaching and some reinforcement and some support, quite honestly,
Support. I agree.
on how to motivate, right? Because it's not just about, well, we're going to send them to a class. Have you ever tried to send some frontline supervisors in the manufacturing industry
Yes, I have.
to a class?
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
They don't want to sit down for a whole
No.
day.
And and they
So
forget
that's
it
like
in 2 weeks.
yeah, right. So, there's that. It's sort of, there's this confluence of things happening, and we've been talking about this for, easily 20 years, that there was going to be this brain drain, right? The workers that were retiring were outpacing those who were coming in, and the ones who were leaving have all of this institutional knowledge. We heard it in the utility industry all the time. It's like, you can have SOPs for every part of your process, but until you have the number of years on the job that I have, you can't, understand what a leak in this part of the system sounds like, right? That's kind of some of the words that you'll hear from the tenured employees. Then you also hear from some of these frontline supervisors, that the kids today, I mean, we're 2 steps away from guys going, get off my lawn, right? But we've got the frontline supervisors will pull their guys in for a tailgate meeting, or a start of a day or whatever, and their common complaint is these guys are playing on their phones the entire meeting. And I've heard that from blue collar frontline supervisors. I've heard that from general managers at the operational level. I've heard it at all levels of the kids today, right? These Gen Z and the millennial, et cetera. But what's interesting is most of them are not playing on their phone. Yes, there's a percentage of them that have tuned you out and they've moved on. Most of them, though, are using their phones to take notes. Most of them are using their phones to then internalize what they're hearing, and then using an app, using Google, whatever, to get more context around what they're learning. And so we've always had this sort of built-in, if not conflict, at least moderate chaos when we've had multiple generations in the workforce. Well, now it's even more exacerbated between things like ChatGPT, things like automation, AI, all of these sorts of things. But the technology exists now, and it is physically connected to this generation. I think the next generation is going to come out with apps already downloaded into their brains, right? And so there is this disconnect that I think I was just about to say is even wider than ever, but I suspect we always say this. I suspect with every new generation, there is a shift, there is a change, and we're always saying, oh my gosh, the disconnect is wider than ever. I think the search for connection is more keenly felt than ever, because we've looked to technology to replace other relationships. So there are always opportunities, even in the most blue collar of an industry, to innovate. There are opportunities for people on the front lines to raise their hand and say, especially when they're new, why do we do this process going from A to Z with 40 steps? And why are we doing it this way? Couldn't we do this with these 12 steps gone, right? If you create a culture, especially in the manufacturing and the metals industry, where you encourage and you invite and you empower and you recognize people coming up, and you said it earlier, asking questions and continually, sort of putting pressure on their leaders to explain the why. Why is it that we do it this way? Why is it that we're striving for this? Why is it that competitor's kicking our butts? If we create a culture that is genuinely empowering and creates that environment where questions are not just allowed, but they are vital to the health and the growth and the sustainability and competitiveness of your company, you're going to attract the right people.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. These things happen, right? Like, I would imagine that the generation of my grandparents were saying, these hippies, they got no future. What the hell? So
you call that music? That's not music.
That's right. Death metal or whatever they would call it, or devil's music.
Right? Yeah, right.
So same thing, but just on a different scale with technology.
Yeah.
I agree with everything you said. Thank you. And thank you. Like, you have so much information to share. And I want to ask you I've been thinking about how to word this, but I guess just advice. I don't know if there's a specific audience member you want to speak to, but so I'll just say, what is your advice to the audience, anybody that you choose, in business or the manufacturing industry?
Yeah. So I'll speak specifically to the leaders. So the leaders in the manufacturing industry, and I'll just speak directly to them. Listen, you guys have a very tough job.
Yeah.
You have an industry that admittedly, as we just said, doesn't always know how to attract, let alone retain the right people, the right talent to help you get where you want to go. And you have a bunch of people that on the surface are not super sophisticated, and they don't necessarily respond to the same interventions or training or development or performance reviews that their office-based counterparts do. So you have a very challenging job. But I will tell you one thing you have in common with every other leader, even in the C-level, something very important, which is you don't have all the answers. I don't care if you are the CEO of a $100 billion company, or you are the frontline supervisor or manager of one location. And I've talked to all of you. You all struggle with this sort of perception that you have to have all the answers. And spoiler alert, your people already know that you don't have all the answers. So, the more, and I keep saying this word authentic, the more authentically you can lean into what you do know and lean on your team to learn what you don't, the more human you are going to remind them you actually are. And it's through that vulnerability, and I know that's a scary word for you leaders in the manufacturing industry, but the more vulnerable you can acknowledge that you are and open to their ideas, the more they're going to be willing to help you. So do that, because you're doing yourself, your future, and your leadership following a disservice by fighting against that.
Wow, that was wonderful. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that.
What a pleasure it's been to have you. Much appreciated. So thank you everybody for listening. This was such a great episode. I'm ecstatic. So Claire, thank you very much, and we'll be in touch.
Sounds great. I really appreciate the opportunity to come on.
Likewise. Thank you. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Greg Sheldon here, your host of Metal, Steel, Manufacturing, and Business Pro podcast, where you learn everything about the metals and manufacturing industry that make your modern day life possible.